Hi. How you doing? Good to be with you guys. So excited to be here today. My name is Kyle, if you're new this morning, and my family and I, we've been gone for the last 7 weeks. I spent 5 weeks on sabbatical, just letting the Lord speak into me, doing a prayer retreating, meeting with some different leaders, and the last couple of weeks spent some time with family, just a great time. And so I just wanted to say a special thank you to the church and the board, and especially Pastor Adam for filling in the last few weeks. He did a great job. Let's give him a hand this morning. I wanted to also say a special thank you to Pastor Garrett and Pastor Age. They killed it the weeks that they spoke. Let's give them a hand as well. Thank you so much. And just so excited to be back. My wife was telling me and my family, we're ready to come back to our church, Dad. And so we're so glad to be here today. But I want to just celebrate this morning before we kind of get into what we're going to talk about today. You guys have been busy this summer doing a lot of amazing things, and we want to just celebrate that. Sometimes we don't take enough time to celebrate what God's been doing. And so this morning, I just want to share today, and some of these things that I'm going to share with you are the reason that we have church in the first place. It's the reason that we meet together. And the first thing is simply this. As you know, every year we raise money to send our kids to camp. And Pastor Garrett told me that this year we had 3 weeks of teen camp, and we had 9 students for the first time accept Jesus Christ into their hearts. And so we give God praise for that. Yeah, it's okay to clap. That is awesome. Kids camp. We had 29 little kids who prayed the sinner's prayer and asked Jesus into their heart. And some of us might say, well, did they know what they were praying? We don't know what they knew, but we knew they prayed that prayer. And for some of those kids, maybe all those kids, they meant that. So let's give God a hand. That is awesome. 29 kids prayed the sinner's prayer. And so we celebrate that. I was told by Pastor Thomas that the 5th and 6th grade boys' dorm on the last night of camp turned into a piece of heaven. And God just came, and we had one student in 6th grade who asked Jesus, not only asked Jesus into his heart, but more importantly, felt a call into full-time ministry in 6th grade. I was told that kids began to just share what was going on in their lives. And so the monies and the dollars that you donated towards did not go in vain. So let's give God a hand for that as well. That is awesome. And then we had 4 baptized in 2 weeks. We had a college student baptized. A few months back, if you weren't here, we built a tiny house for a lady who lives in Baxter, and she came to church and found the Lord, and she was baptized. She was one of the 4 that was baptized. We had 2 high school students get baptized, testifying that Jesus is the Lord of their life. That's a big win. Let's give God a hand. That is awesome. And we're excited and celebrating Pastor Garrett and Andy, who are our youth pastors here. They've had between 14 and 16 students on Saturday nights at their house, and they're beginning to disciple them. We had PittNaz at the park this summer, and I'm told that went really well. So God has just done some amazing things over the summer, and we just celebrate that because sometimes we don't always see, we don't go to teen camp, we don't go to kids camp, we don't always see the things that God is doing, and so we just celebrate that God is doing amazing things in our church and in our kids' lives, and so we just wanted to say thank you. As I mentioned earlier, my family and I, we went on vacation, and today we're going to talk about multiply. It's a kingdom thing. So say that with me. Multiply. It's a kingdom thing. And I want to tell you about some fear that began to multiply in me one day while we were at the beach. My brother, Jade, is also a pastor, and he's in Maryland. And while we were on vacation, we went and visited them, and we stayed at the beach at Chincoteague Beach, Virginia. And while we were there, we were kind of swimming and hanging out, and we noticed that way out in the water was just like ankle deep. People were out there kind of walking around and bodyboarding, and so Noah, myself, and Jay decided that we were going to go do that. And so we went, I don't know how far out we went, probably 500 yards or farther out in the middle of the ocean, and there was just like, not in the middle of the ocean, but quite a ways from the beach. The water was just up to your ankle, and so we began to jump off the sandbar and do some bodyboarding, if you want to call it that. And after a while, we began to notice that what we thought we had drifted from the sandbar. What had really happened was the current had changed, the sandbar was gone, we're a long ways from the beach, and the water's churning all these different directions. We were caught in a riptide. And so fear began to multiply in us, and my brother Jade, he said, Kyle, you guys we've wandered off path of the sandbar. We need to swim back to it. And so we began to swim. And Noah's an excellent swimmer, and so am I, and so is Jade. We began to swim, and we noticed we weren't getting anywhere. Well, we thought, we've got these bodyboards, that's part of the problem. And Jade was kind of teasing us because Noah and I had the bodyboards, and he let go of one, and he's like, you guys can't swim anywhere. And he began to realize he was having trouble swimming. And Noah began to say, Dad, I think I'm just going to head back to the beach. I said, yeah, that might be a good idea. Noah got about 10 feet from me, and Jade said, Kyle, you might want to go with him. The water's kind of weird. I said, well, I can't get anywhere with this stupid bodyboard. He says, well, you take it. And as he was saying that to me, I'm thinking, this is the last time I'm going to see him alive. And so I took off trying to swim to Noah, and I don't know if you've ever been caught in water like that. I couldn't get to him. And he's just swimming as hard as he can. He looks like he's making progress, but I'm thinking, nobody's going to be able to keep up that momentum. And I just remember this fear multiply inside of me, thinking, I can't reach him if I want to. And finally, somehow, Noah makes it to the beach, and now I'm worried about myself. I'm turning around. I can't even see Jade. I finally get back to, I don't know how long we were out there. I finally kind of get back to the shoreline, and I'm getting ready. I'm turning around, and I can't see Jade anywhere. And I'm thinking, I can't go in without Jade. And I turn around to head back out, and I hear Whitney yell, every man for himself! Come on into the beach. No, she didn't say that. She was yelling at me not to go back out there so I wouldn't drown, but I didn't hear her. And so we go back out, and Jade said he began to pray, God, would you send somebody? And about that time, the lifeguard went over the wave and grabbed him. And when he got really close to shore, then I tried to take credit for rescuing him. But I share that story, one, because that's kind of a story now, but also because I want to talk about this idea of fear and that how it can multiply inside of us. I remembered, I'm not a person that panics easily. And I'm not into drama, and people, some people are really dramatic, and I'm not one of them. But I remember in that moment thinking, I kind of began to panic a little bit. And it began to multiply inside of me. And I began to realize really quickly, this is a somewhat serious situation here. Jesus is trying to not multiply fear in his disciples in Matthew chapter 25, if you have your Bibles and you want to go there, Matthew chapter 25. He's not trying to multiply fear. He's trying to multiply faith in them, and at the same time, he's trying to explain what the stakes are. I remember, and actually, I don't know if he's in here now, but, Martin's in here. I remember Martin telling me one time, the only time you should ever yell at your wife is if your house is on fire. And I think that there are times where we're not drama queens, but there are times where we don't understand what's at stake. And as a result of not understanding what's we're not always at stake, we're not either prepared or we're not ready for something when it happens. Probably some of the, I've yelled at my kids before, obviously, but one of the most times, the loudest I've ever yelled at Luke is, Whitney and I are terrified, we live in town, that he's going to run out in the street and get hit by a car. And he plays in the front yard, and we have neighbors that play with him, and he likes to ride his bike down our driveway that's kind of slanted. And some of my most serious voice is explaining to him, you're not going to get close to the road. I don't want you in the road. And the reason is because of what's at stake. I remember as a kid getting in so much trouble for not telling the truth and thinking, why is that such a big deal? And as an adult, and as I got older, I began to realize why that was such a big deal to my dad. There are things that are worth going to the wall over. There's a lot of things that aren't, but there are some things that are. Jesus in Matthew chapter 25 is trying to tell a story, a parable, which is a fictional story with a divine point. He's trying to tell a story to help his disciples understand that time on earth isn't really all that long and that they need to be good stewards of the things that God has given them. And so he tells this story, and some of us have heard this story, and I've preached this story before, but the Lord gave this story to me while I was on prayer retreat to share with you today. Jesus explains that there's a boss or an employer, and we'll find out later that the boss or the employer in the story is God or Jesus. And he's going to take a long trip, and we learn later that the long trip is Jesus leaving earth and going to heaven. And we find that eventually he's going to return, which is the second coming that we haven't experienced yet. So he says this boss goes on a long trip, and before he leaves, he entrusts his silver, his bags of silver, his possessions, his gold, his money to 3 different servants. And these servants, in Matthew chapter 5, these servants, they have different abilities and different gifts and different talents. And as a result of that, he gives 5 bags to the first servant, and he gives 2 bags to the one servant, and he gives 1 bag to the last servant. And when the boss comes home, when he returns, he finds that servant number 1 has taken those 5 bags and multiplied them and turned them into 10. And he finds that servant 2 has taken his 2 bags and multiplied them into 4. And servant 3, who while the boss was away, instead of being multiplied with faith and boldness, he allows fear to come inside of him, and rather than multiply, he hides the master's money. And when the boss returns, he gives rewards and punishments based on what happened. I got in Luke's face the other day, and I said, "You do not go close to the road. Do you understand me?" He's not making eye contact with me. You ever grabbed your kid by the face and put their eyes on yours? Do you hear the words that are coming out of my mouth? Because I want him to get it. And servants 1 and 2, when the boss finds out about what the servants had done, he says, "Great job, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now," let's read the next few words, "I will give you..." Let's celebrate together. But what we find out with servant 3 is that Jesus doesn't give a reward, he gives a punishment. And it's not just the punishment in this fictional story that Jesus is trying to convey. He's trying to teach his disciples then and trying to teach us now that what's at stake is why the punishment is so severe. See, you were given something. You were given some talents. You were given some ability. You were given the ability to sing. You were given the ability to lead. You were given the ability to train. You were given the ability to encourage. You were given the ability to listen. You were given the ability to do what it is that I made you to do, and you didn't do anything with it other than build your own kingdom. So he takes away what was given to the servant. And Jesus, telling this story, says not only was his money taken away, but the servant was thrown into darkness where there would be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That seems kind of harsh. If somebody was walking by our street and saw me with my hand on my son's face, they might think something. But if you put it in the context of, oh, he's teaching him not to go into the road. Then the servant with the one bag of silver says, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, which means that he gets God wrong. He gets his boss wrong. He missed it altogether. I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money. Let's read those blue words. I was afraid I would lose. Say with me. I was afraid. There's a difference between playing to not lose and playing to win. Jesus was teaching his disciples and reminding us today that whatever we've been given, we're called to multiply it. Because the boss isn't coming back, Jesus is coming back. And the bags in the story aren't money. The bags in the story are our talents and our abilities and the people in our life that need to know Christ. Jesus says to those who use well, they are given even more, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. So the question becomes, what is Jesus saying about the kingdom of heaven in this parable? The boss has a bunch of money, but he didn't want his workers to just rely on what was earned in the past. He wanted him to multiply what had been given. Now stay with me. I know this is, a lot of talking here, but it's God's word, 1 and 2, it's got a point. Sometimes the enemy of current success is past success. Jesus was trying to explain that the kingdom of heaven is about multiplication, not stagnation. He was trying to explain that the kingdom of heaven is about multiplication, not stagnation. It's not what happened when I earned all that money and I just want you to manage it. It's not about the fact that this kid got saved 10 years ago and we can, for the rest of eternity, point to that and say God showed up. It's not about staying stagnant on what happened or what used to be. It's about multiplying what is and what will be. What if 5 years ago, which would be 2013, what if Pastor Jim, who was the pastor at that time, said, you know what? We're healthy. Our church is doing some good things. Let's just sit back. What if last year we would have said we didn't want to buy the homestead over here, which is just a couple houses from here. If you're new today, it's a college ministry that we saw an average of 100 kids a week go through. Some of those were repeats, but they're coming through. What if we just said, you know what? We don't want to have to mess with that, and we don't want to have to spend that, and we don't want to have to find volunteers for that. We're happy with what we have. What if we said 10 years ago, we don't want to step out in faith and spend $30,000 to $40,000 every year to send kids to camp? What if we just said, we're done multiplying? I mean, we had that happen one time. There was a season where, God was really moving and it produced 5 bags and it produced 2 bags and it produced 1 bag. Well, Pastor, the church is big enough. Pastor Jim, there's not attendance. There's 330 people. attendance makes it sound like we're about numbers. And Pastor, I don't want us to be about numbers. So 330 souls, 330 people, 350 people, 380 people, however many it was, that's enough. Because we don't want to be, a church that's about numbers. Every one of those numbers is a person with a soul. What if Ralph Hauser and Mamie Hauser, you don't need to know who they are if you don't know who they are. There are local missions people here. What if they didn't just take it upon themselves to get a team together and go down to Baxter Springs and find this lady who had no heat and no running water in the middle of the wintertime and decide to turn her storage shed into a tiny house? What if we just said, you know what, we're done trying to reach out. That's in Baxter. Can I tell you something? She wouldn't have been baptized. That's Mary. They went down there. They didn't tell Mary who God was. They showed Mary who God was. She didn't come the next week, but eventually she came. It wasn't because of the preachers. It's because somebody loved on her. Mary found the Lord. She was baptized. Folks, the kingdom of heaven is about multiplication, not stagnation. Can I tell you today that the harvest we are experiencing today in our church is because of the planting that took place 5 years ago and 10 years ago. In church, if we want to see a harvest 5 years from now, then we have to plant today. We have to love today. My brother Jade, when we were at his house, I was really jealous of his garden. He's got a big green thumb, and it's not a massive garden or anything, but it's probably the size of one of these sections. Doesn't have a weed in it. They're pulling stuff out of there. Do you know why they have a harvest every year? Because they plant every year. If you run a business, are you going to rely on how busy you were last year? Or are you going to keep hustling and keep trying to book jobs so that you have a harvest this year? What Jesus is explaining to us and what I want to share with you today is that if we want to see God continue to move, we have to allow God to continue to move in us. The kingdom of heaven is about multiplication, not stagnation. In 2020, which is 2 years from now, our church will be 100 years old. I was told that our church in 1920 was birthed out of a kind of like an old-fashioned tent revival that took place, I think, on the east side of town, wasn't it, Jim? The average lifespan of a church is about the same lifespan of a person. It's 70 years. Our church will celebrate 100 years in 2 years. We've already beat the average by 30 years, and we're not just surviving, the church is thriving. Because the churches understand the idea, our churches understands the idea of multiplication, not stagnation. In church, if we want to continue to see God do a harvest for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we have to continue to reach people. We have to continue to share Jesus with other people. Nick Saban, who is a football coach for the Alabama Crimson Tide, I don't know how many championships he's won, a lot. 6 at Alabama, and I think something like that, 5 or 6. Somebody know exactly? Something like that, 5. And he's won 1 or 2 or 3 at LSU. And somebody was interviewing him a while back, and I saw a video of it on Facebook. And they asked him, why do you keep winning? He said, that's easy, 48 hours. I said, what? 48 hours? After we win the championship, we give them 48 hours, our coaching staff, because the kids turn over. Our coaching staff gets 48 hours to enjoy it. And then we forget about it. And we start working on next year. And then he said this, and I'll remember this quote. I'm going to remember this quote forever. He said, success is not continuum. It's momentary. Winning the championship last year has no bearing on whether we win it this year or not. And can I tell you, 5 years ago, if we had 10 kids get saved at camp, that rings in eternity forever. But folks, we got to continue to reach more kids. We got to continue to reach more people. If we want to continue to see God do amazing things, we got to continue to pray. If we want to see God do things to reach the people that aren't here, the people that you know, we've got to continue to be used. That's why Jesus is saying, are you using your talents? Are you using your abilities? Because we're going to stand before God someday and say, I gave you the ability to sing so that you could connect with people. Did you sing? I gave you the ability to encourage. Did you encourage? I gave you the ability to lead, to administer, to equip, to listen, to love, to take on people that other people won't take on. Did you use that gift to build your kingdom or my kingdom? And what Jesus was telling the disciples and what we can learn from today, God's definition of success is one more person. One more person. We celebrate that 9 students accepted the Lord. We celebrate that 4 people were baptized. We celebrate that 29 kids prayed to ask Jesus into their heart. But that's not everybody. What if you and I prayed this prayer? The action step for today. Jesus, help me reach someone. Let's say that together. Jesus, help me reach someone. Can I tell you today that by default, you and I will be held accountable for how we lead our kids. And we will stand before God and we will give an account. Did you tell your kids about me? Did you model what it is to follow me? So that's a default. That's a given. I'm saying that's a given. It counts. But outside of our kids that we are all called to reach, and our grandkids and those around us, what if we begin to pray, God, would you help me reach someone? Ralph prayed that. Mary got baptized. Many of you prayed that. And kids have been saved at camp. If you aren't using what God has given you to build God's kingdom, then you are building your kingdom rather than the kingdom of heaven. Moses was given a staff. Aaron was given a voice. Noah was to build a boat. David was to beat a giant. Esther was to use her beauty to approach the king. Daniel was to pray in the lion's den. Paul was to plant churches. Jesus was to carry a cross, be nailed to it, and raised from the tomb. Imagine if Moses didn't use his staff. He didn't stretch it along the Red Sea. Aaron didn't use his voice. Noah didn't build the boat. David decided to do the math and said, I'm too small and he's too big. Esther said, I'm too scared to approach the king. Daniel decided to follow the rules and not pray. Paul decided not to plant all those churches. Jesus didn't want the pain of the cross and death. Doing nothing wasn't an option for them, and it isn't for us. God uses people to multiply His message. Why? Because multiplication is a God thing. Stagnation, which is doing nothing, doesn't sit well with God. Servant number 3 was afraid. And fear can cripple us while faith empowers us. Are you filled with fear or filled with faith this morning? Before I left on sabbatical, I preached this message on wrestling with God. And when you hear God speak to you, you move from fear to faith. And folks, I got down on my face on this prayer retreat and I asked God to give me wisdom and to give me direction. And folks, He spoke clear to me. And our future is bright as a church to reach lost folks. And you've been hearing Steve on the videos talk about the Don't Miss Sunday fall edition, which will be at the Bicknell Center. And we're going to lay out a 5-year plan to continue to reach people, because our goal will always be to reach one more. The kingdom of heaven is about multiplication, not stagnation. Say it with me. The kingdom of heaven is about multiplication, not stagnation. So as we stand together this morning, I'm going to ask you, and I realize not all of us are going to do this, and that's fine. Maybe somebody will. I'm going to ask you today, with your head bowed and your eyes closed, if there's somebody in here today that would commit to praying that prayer. God, help me reach someone. Father, show me who it is. What if you begin to pray that prayer? What if you made a commitment just for this next week, to each day this week pray, God, help me to multiply myself and what you're doing in my life and someone else's. Father, build your kingdom here.
Come set you rule and reign in our hearts again. Increase in us, we pray. Unveil why we're made. Come set our hearts ablaze with hope, like wildfire in our very souls. Holy Spirit, come invade us now. And we are your church, and we need your power in us. We seek your kingdom first. We hunger and we thirst. Refuse to waste our lives for your joy and prize. To see the captive hearts released, the hurt, the sick, the poor at peace. We lay down our lives for heaven's cause. And we are your church, and we pray revive this earth. Build your kingdom here, let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand, heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire, win this nation back. Change the atmosphere, build your kingdom here. We pray, unleash your kingdom's power, reaching the near and far. No force of hell can stop your beauty changing hearts. You made us for such more than this. Awake the kingdom seed in us. Fill us with the strength and love of Christ. We are your church, and we the hope on earth. And build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here. We pray. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here. We pray.
Man, I know this is kind of anticlimactic, but this Lord's just been giving me this thought the last couple of days and been hesitant to say it because it's still so fresh for so many of us, but we're all familiar, I would imagine all of us are familiar with the Ride the Ducks tragedy that happened in Branson. I think there was like 31 people on board, and was it like 17 passed away, and the captain, right, of the boat survived. And you hear people say, and rightly so, you know, why weren't they told to put their life jackets on? You know, it'll all come out later who's responsible for what. One of the reasons why you hold people accountable that could have maybe made a difference is because it could have saved someone. And I was thinking today that God is telling us, those of us who are believers, that He's given each of us a role to help save someone, not just from physical death, but spiritual death. And when we don't do our part, eternity's in the balance. And we will stand before God someday. Just the messenger here. We will stand before God someday, every one of us, me too. And we will give an account. Did you give someone a life jacket? Because you knew where the life jacket was. Did you give the life jacket? Or did you say, I'll tell you about that later? We're not promised tomorrow. Are you using what God has gifted you with and what He's calling you to build His kingdom? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn His face towards you and give you peace. Have a great Sunday.